Thank you very much for joining us here on the Voice of Job Seekers. This is Mark, and you probably just got through seeing me. If you're looking at my timeline, I just did a panel that was about an hour long. This one's going to be a little bit shorter. I want to have these gentlemen on because they wrote a book that you should be interested in. It's called Don't Take That Job Till You Read This Book. Leigh Branham and Mark Hirschfield has joined me to talk about their book. And I want to have them on as well. They were kind enough to include me in the book on the expert panel. So I thank both of you very much for doing so. A little bit about each of you can talk about your past work, maybe in a sentence or two. We'll start with Mark.
Thank you, sir. Hi, Mark Hirschfield, Minneapolis, Minnesota. Started with what you would now know as the Gallup organization back in 1981. And this is my fifth decade of kind of thinking about creating and great workplaces. And maybe after my fifth decade, I've maybe got a thing or two figured out. So looking forward to having this conversation.
Great. Leigh?
I am a disciple of Richard Bowles, the author of What Color is Your Parachute? He helped me change my careers back in the 70s. And then I worked with Mark in the Heartland region of Right Management Consultants and had a long career doing career coaching in the outplacement career transition industry until I started researching employee retention and started my own company, Keeping the People, back in the early 2000s, and have been doing that ever since. And Mark and I have written a book together previously, and Mark suggested we take a look at how the reasons people leave could be looked at from another perspective, the job seeker's perspective, and suggested we write a second book together. And that's what we've done.
Yes, and a big shout out to Bill Holland, who we connected through that we've all known for a number of years. Mark, I know you know Bill, and Leigh, I know you've gone back, but I came in contact with Leigh through his work on, I believe it's the 7 reasons why employees leave. Back in the early days of my blog back in 2011. And that's a long story with itself, but I want to give a shout out to Bill, as I'm sure he'll be listening at some particular point. But I want to get this kind of go along with Leigh, as you were saying that this is part two for you, but in the sense that you're trying to keep people from making the same mistakes maybe they made the last time, as opposed to figuring out this is not the place for me. Isn't that right?
That's pretty much it. I think most people have a horror story about taking a job and then fairly quickly realizing, there's some nasty surprises I wasn't expecting. And we've been collecting some of those stories and put them in the book. But the main purpose of the book was to look at all the possible pitfalls, the main reasons employees leave, and flip the coin and look at it and say, these might be one of the reasons you would leave your next employer. And so we go through them one at a time, but we first talk about who are you, and we have some self-assessment exercises at the beginning of the book. And then the second chapter is how to go about the job search in such a way that you have a large enough range of options of possible employers that it's more likely that you have the right fit company included.
Yes. And both of you have done career coaching over time. I don't do one-on-one coaching. I don't think you guys do either, but it's not really so much of a new concept, except it's a concept being amplified amplified at this particular time. Isn't that right, Mark?
It absolutely is. I think we have focused, and job seekers focus on what the literature calls person job fit. And that's super important, that do my strengths, do my skills, interests, and abilities fit with the job. What we're suggesting to job seekers is that they also need to think about a different kind of fit, but equally as important, and that is person culture fit. Do we fit within this particular culture? And we use the lenses from Leigh's book to say, what is the leadership like? What are career opportunities like? And the factors that we know that if people don't experience those things, oftentimes can lead them to being demoralized and then in turn leaving. And so we thought, again, as Leigh mentioned, we just turn that coin on the other side and let the job seekers use those lenses to say, is this going to be a good fit for me, not only in the job and the responsibilities, but a good fit from a cultural perspective as well?
Yeah. Leigh, what do you think is the one thing playing out now? Maybe we talk about 2023. I don't know if you're familiar with the all the terms that are being used. I think one thing is people are using as far as them staying in place or not, like the great resignation. I think we're past people job hopping, though job hopping was never new. Really, all these terms that we use now that we see in the news, we see the media, that really never changed. It's just being spotlighted because it's what we're seeing is seeing it's coming in a way that's a little bit different than we've never seen before.
We have to really step back and think about the pandemic effect. And what
Mm-hmm.
really happened was people had the money coming from the government, they had a little bit of cushion if they lost their jobs, and a lot of people took the time to really think about what is it that I really want.
Mm-hmm.
And we also had a lot of companies that were downsizing and doing it in a rather unfeeling way.
Mm-hmm.
So you got a sense of which companies were more empathetic to the plight of a job seeker and which companies weren't.
Mm-hmm.
And people had the luxury of thinking, you know what, I'm gonna use this opportunity to think about what I really want. And we also got used to remote work. So a lot of people say, well, like this, and I'm in a position maybe to negotiate. Maybe I have a little more leverage with my employer than I used to have.
Mm-hmm.
So in that sense, our book came out at exactly the right time with the guidelines for how to vet your potential employer. And that's something most job search books don't do very well. And we think that's a unique aspect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's been, even though there's been coaching surrounding that for some years now, when we talk about being recent, probably more so in the past 5 years, people are taking a look a little bit closer, though it's not large enough because people are making the mistakes still of going to the wrong fitting job. And what uniquely to you, Mark, is different about looking at a company now than, let's say, about 10 years ago?
I think a lot of the patterns are the same. And Mark, to your point, sometimes we put new terms on things like the notion of quiet quitting. I
Yeah.
heard from a friend of mine who was in the military 30 years ago. They in that area they call that retired while on active duty. The dynamics of some of these things have been around for a time, and the seven broad cultural patterns that we ask people to, again, just review and see if these are important. Does the organization help you get off to a great start? Do they offer
Mm-hmm.
opportunities for career development? Are they solving for some of your own personal work life needs? Those patterns are largely holding, but how those might be expressed are a little bit different. In the example that Leigh gave with regard to more people going remote, that's
Mm-hmm.
there always have been some people, but now that's a larger population. And what can we do to find out as job seekers that if I'm in a remote role or a hybrid role or a full-time role, those are newer concepts for how they're doing, but we can still look at those broad patterns and say, if I'm going to be a remote person, do I still feel like this is a place where I can be recognized and have opportunities to grow? What's the leadership like, and et cetera. So the broad patterns we think are holding, but how those might be expressed within these just remarkable new dynamics that have come in the last few years, there certainly are many important things for people to consider within these seven broad patterns of why good people tend to be demoralized and leave if these broad patterns aren't evident in their work experience.
Yeah, we're all hoping that the old way of thinking will just go away, but of course, it won't go away by osmosis. It's going to take some reaction once they realize that people, and I think that's happening now because companies are having the real tuggle of either losing people who they consider real talent to jobs that are adapting the hybrid remote as opposed to being all in into the returning to the office, aren't really?
Yes, people are. There's a new concept called bare minimum Mondays, which is a revolutionary idea that we're reacting. Generation Z seems to be reacting against the idea that you're willing to give up uh, your personal life, work weekends, work evenings, and so forth. Um, I read recently that 42% of workers in one poll would take a 15% pay cut to work from home.
Mm-hmm.
I think
Mm-hmm.
that's a Generation Z thing that we're seeing, and it also has a lot to do with the fact that's an option that more people
Right.
have now that they didn't used to have.
Yeah. Yeah. There's all the trends because of technology. Like there are people who are there are some companies who are paying employees every day. Uh, can you imagine having not to wait 2 weeks to get a check, or being able to resign and get paid for that very day? And that's pretty much it. There's no 2 or 3 week or 2 or 3 month lag time between getting your first and last check. Technology, the technology access changed everything, and we've seen almost a complete 180 from what we used to see when we were coming up, right, Mark?
That's a good example. I actually have a couple of corporate clients who have implemented that same day pay. And they did it because what they found was is that there were a number of their employees who were using their role as more kind of in a part-time kind of thing. And what was a value proposition to a cohort of these people is, I'll work with you today, and I'd like to be paid because tonight I'd like to take my family out for dinner and a movie. And that was the exchange. And that was a reasonable one in terms of one of the factors that we talk about. Is your employer helping you feel valued from a compensation and reward point of view? And if the paycheck is not until next Thursday, I can't take my family out for a dinner and a movie. And these are good
Right.
examples of where hopefully organizations are doing things. And this is a small cohort, but are they providing under those seven lenses that I know you value that kind of model, Mark? But then as a job
Mm-hmm.
seeker, if I'm looking for that kind of thing, that example gives us the organization is getting work at a time when it's more challenging for them to schedule. So that's a win for the employer, and it's a win for the employee because they're able to do something meaningful, important, and valuable to them with their family. So both win from those kinds of exchanges. Some of the things that have to be done, of course, are far more difficult or long term, but it's a terrific example of where if employers are listening, they can do a good job. And then the job seekers who are looking for, again, that particular kind of important part of their employment experience would say, that's just exactly what I was looking for. I'm going to work hard so that I can earn that paycheck and then go do something important and enjoyable with my family.
Absolutely. So to get both of you out of here on this last particular question, I'd like each of you start with you, Mark, and talking about what would you say has been the one key thing that really works for people to find the right culture to, or the right job to work for, and the right culture to fit in.
Yeah, it's such an important thing. And again, Mark, with the advent of social media and all of that, there certainly are ways that people can connect or gain information online about a
Hmm.
prospective employer, reviews on various kinds of sites, et cetera. But I think if you stop there, you're losing the opportunity to gain additional insights from that old fashioned,
Hmm.
just personal networking and developing relationships and finding out from, oh, I see somebody on social media who's a former employer at a employee who I know, and making those connections, whether it be someone who is working at a target company, a former employee, perhaps someone providing services to those companies. There are lots of folks who have a good sense of an organization and that so-called person culture fit, and just do that
Hmm.
extra homework so that you have a strong level of confidence that when you're joining a company, you do really know a lot about the culture, good, bad, and otherwise, and have made
Hmm.
a far more informed decision as a result of doing that just a little additional effort.
Yeah, Leigh, I'm sure you agree and you want to add as
Well,
well.
I'll point out that in each of our chapters and each of the lenses that we suggest you look through before joining a particular culture, there are
Hmm.
questions to ask during the interview. And most job seekers don't ask enough questions. We probably give them too many in the book to think about asking. So
You do give
they're going
quite
to
a
have to
bit.
decide which ones of these questions are most appropriate, because you can also ask too many in a job interview. So you need to weave them into a back and forth discussion if you can. But for example, if you're interested in career advancement, then and you want to look at whether the company uh, considers a broad range of ways to advance and grow, you might ask, can you tell me about somebody who moved sideways in the company in order to eventually move up? And if they can't give you an example of
Hmm.
that, then that may not be the right culture for you.
Yeah, yeah, and to really take that into serious consideration, of course, the job seeker is the last person to judge. That's going to be right or wrong. Where they might hear something that's not so positive, it may be necessary uh, um, negative for them. Gentlemen, thank you very much for talking about your book. Don't take that job until. I definitely want to thank Leigh Branham, Mark Hirschfield for joining me here on the Voice of Job Seekers. And for the rest of you, thank you very much. And should you have any questions, feel free to call on LinkedIn. Uh, I'll have the links to their LinkedIn profiles and to the websites where the book is for your comfort. And hopefully, all will